People to start to join us, and just feel free to start to join the interpretation in case you need. More people are joining, so just let's give a couple of minutes for them to have audio. Okay, I think we could start. Welcome everyone to this session 4 on the roadmap of the CBD Women Caucus towards COP15. This is our last session of this series. Well, before starting, I will encourage everyone to keep your camera on if possible, if your internet allows it, and your microphone off to not interrupt the speakers while they're presenting. Also, we encourage you to rename your user with your name and organization for all of us to be aware about with whom we are sharing this session. If you want to participate, please raise your hand or leave your question or comment in the chat so we can address them in the allocated time at the end of the session once our speakers are done with their interventions. Also, for everyone to know that we have interpretation into French and Spanish, so go into the bottom menu and select your preferred channel so you are able to interact more comfortably with the session. And also feel free to introduce yourself in the chat so we know who are here and where are you listening from, and also in which organization do you work. So for this session for today, as I was saying, this is the last of a series of 4 workshops, 4 webinars that we hosted as the Women's Caucus of the Convention on Biodiversity. We started back in August 24 with an open webinar for everyone to share a bit about what it is expected to happen during COP15 of the CBD. Then we have a dedicated workshop to discuss among the members of the caucus the latest version of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. And our previous workshop was on September to discuss selected topics of the COP15, such as marine and coastal biodiversity, also the gender plan of action and resource mobilization. And today, as all of you know, the main objective of the session is to give an introduction to both the Cartagena and Nagoya protocols, because as such, often these topics are neglected because people tend to put more attention into the topics of the COP per se, but these other instruments are also relevant because the parties to these protocols are legally binded to apply them. So today, what we're gonna learn from our wonderful speakers and members of the CBD Women Caucus is the main points, the main relevant points about what are these protocols about, which are their objectives, their scope, and particularly we're going to listen and identify entry points for a gender analysis and advocacy for both protocols, and in particular about the Articles 21 and 22 of Nagoya. And for doing this, we have, as I was just mentioning, 3 wonderful speakers. We have Georgina Catacora-Vargas from Bolivia. We have Ruth Spencer from Antigua and Barbuda, and Olga Laiza Kupika from Zimbabwe. We welcome and we thank you a lot for supporting us and be willing to share with the network and outside the network, because today is an open session for members, for people outside the membership of the caucus, but everyone interested in how the protocols of the CBD are related to gender equality. So without anything else to add, I just want to now move into the first presentation, which is going to be given by Georgina. Georgina, thank you so much, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone who is in this session. And I would like to say that I am very happy that we are discussing in this group the different aspects of the other instruments under the CBD that are relevant also for women. And I would like to address a few points, some points in relation to biosafety under the Cartagena Protocol, but that do not only relate to the Cartagena Protocol, but also to the process that we are under the CBD. Recalling that the Cartagena Protocol is subsidiary to the Convention on Biological Diversity, so it's a mandatory of full consistency between these two and the Cartagena Protocol being consistent with what the provisions of the CBD. So I would like to start recalling the objective of the Cartagena Protocol, which is in Article 1, that it says things that are very, very important in the discussion of the biosafety of living modified organisms, as they are called, the genetically modified organisms and other products resulting from modern biotechnology, and that usually are subject of controversy. The Article 1 of the Cartagena Protocol says that in accordance with the precautionary approach, this is something very important. Precautionary approach is a key word in here, contained in Principle 15 of the Rio Declaration. The objective of the Cartagena Protocol, here comes another very important element, is to contribute to ensuring an adequate level of protection in the field of safe transfer, handling, and use of living modified organisms resulting from modern biotechnology. And here comes something very, very important that may have adverse effects on the conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity, taking into account the risks to human health. Here are very important because here we are in this article. There are key aspects that are cross-cutting, not only in relation to the biosafety of modern biotechnology, but also relevant on the whole discussion on related to the three objectives of the CBD, which is the precautionary approach, safe handling, safety. You know, when talking about safe transfer, handling, and use, we are referring to safety, and also the focus is on adverse effects on conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity and taking into account human health. So those are very important aspects that also are that derived from the text of the CBD. So having that in mind, in the MOB 10 that is going to be held this December in Montreal, there are different elements of the Cartagena Protocol, but I would like to focus on some of them. One is detection and identification of LMOs. Other is on socioeconomic considerations, and later on I will address some things in relation to a supplementary protocol. And why this, since we are in this group, why this is important, why the Cartagena Protocol is important from a gender perspective, particularly in relation to women. And it is because we have evidence and accumulated experience that those adverse effects that Article 1 of the Cartagena Protocol is mentioning affects in a differentiated manner to women. And we have particularly rural women. But we have examples from the literature and scientific literature on how, for instance, introgression, meaning in simple words, mixing genes from GM living modified organisms such as LM crops with non LM crops like maize or soybean affects the economic dynamics and to a certain extent livelihoods of rural women. We have also scientific evidence on how the traces of genetic modification remains in food chains, including in highly processed products. And we also have evidence on how the inputs used in the technological package used for producing, for instance, LM crops are accumulated in people's human bodies, including women's milk and placenta. Sorry, I don't know how that is said. Amelia, help me please with the word in English. But we have lots of evidence on how the unsafe use of living modified organisms is affecting in a differentiated manner to women. So based on that, all the topics that are related, are addressed in the Cartagena Protocol are relevant. And in this, in the coming up MOP 10, there are some issues like detection and identification of LMOs. And in the suggested elements for a draft decision are some aspects that I think are very important to follow up. One of those relates, it's in the paragraph 1 of the draft decision that mentions the importance of advancing on detection and identification of LMOs, including synthetic biology. This is not going to be an easy issue. Synthetic biology and gene drivers have been very controversial and very hard to get in the text and decisions of the Cartagena Protocol, because it is argued that it is not a living modified organism, but it is in the sense that it's a product of modern biotechnology, and modern biotechnology is mentioned in the objective Article 1 of the Cartagena Protocol. So also there are research on how synthetic biology is limiting the production, the activities of women and other people, particularly in the rural areas, by replacing synthetic products resulting from synthetic biology with the ones that are, between brackets, I don't like this word, I'm going to use it, naturally produced on the fields. So this is something very important to try to keep. And also in paragraph 3 of the draft decision, there is something related to advance in the experience of and detection of newly developed and unauthorized living modified organisms. Once again, this is very important because there is some mismatch between what is putting out there commercially with the capacities of countries to detect and regulate living modified organisms and unauthorized and spread on authorized LMOs subject to transboundary movement, which is a focus on the part of the scope of the Cartagena Protocol. So following up those issues are very important because when we detect and identify LMOs, the possibilities to prevent their adverse effects in relation to different social actors, including women, increases. So that's very, very important. Among other issues, but because of time, I will leave it there in relation to detection and identification. And then in MOP 10, also it will be discussed the socioeconomic considerations in relation to LMOs, which is Article 26. And this article has been subject of a very big controversy since drafting the Cartagena Protocol and later on with further work, for instance, for establishing an ATEC to provide guidance for voluntary guidance to implement socioeconomic considerations in biosafety decision-making and regulation. So I do think it's very obvious the relevance of socioeconomic considerations in relation to women, and we can start this with the second objective of the Convention on Biological Diversity that refers to sustainable use. Use by itself, and particularly if it is sustainable, it has a very strong socioeconomic component, and there is lots of scientific evidence showing that LMOs have different impacts, adverse impacts on biodiversity, not only in relation to plants, but also in relation to fauna, domesticated biodiversity or agrobiodiversity, as well as wild biodiversity. So it is very important to keep working and giving strength to this article, because it relates very closely to care and the productive roles that women have. And the draft decision includes something that perhaps as a group we can consider working on, and is something very important to remain in the final decision, which is submitting experiences of using voluntary guidance, the voluntary guidance that was developed by the article on socioeconomic considerations. As any other discussion process, is not a perfect guidance, but provides important elements to move forward the issue and to keep showing that socioeconomic considerations are very important in biosafety decision making. And also another important element of the draft decision is to keep in the upcoming national reports information, require parties to inform about how they are considering socioeconomic aspects related to LMOs. Now, the COP10 will also discuss about the Nagoya Kuala Lumpur Supplementary Protocol on liability and redress to the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety, which is mentioned briefly as the supplementary protocol. This has been another very controversial issue, but it was a very big advance to have a supplementary protocol that recognizes that there is liability and the responsibility of redressing the adverse effects that derive from living modified organisms. And that's the objective of this supplementary protocol. So there are, for the time being, 49 parties who have ratified. And it is very important also because the effects and the differentiated effects of adverse effects of LMOs on women and other groups deserves to be redressed, and the people who are responsible need to assume their liability. This is very important. This is why it is very important to work to raise awareness on the relevance of ratifying this protocol, and also to raise capacities in relation to what it involves and what are the institutional adjustments needed to implement it. One aspect that is very important in this draft, in the draft decision related to the supplementary protocol, refers to the financial mechanisms. That has been a very controversial also discussion during the drafting of the supplementary protocol. There is a report that guides parties on how it can be secured or work towards financial security to implement the supplementary protocol, and that's something very important to address. Finally, in relation to broader issues on the CBD and the post-2020 GBF, I do believe that it's very important to start raising the aspects and the relationship between DSI and living modified organisms and potential adverse effects on conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity. DSI is very relevant, of course, in relation to the third objective of the convention. This is where the discussions have been concentrated, but also what are the other implications of DSI? So this is something that we will need to discuss, reflect, and also as it corresponds to reflected in the future decisions under the CBD. This is one issue, and another one relates to Target 17, when we have an attempt to include the aspects of the Cartagena Protocol, but also it's very important to parties to the CBD argue that not all of them are parties to the Cartagena Protocol, which is true, but the CBD has provisions on preventing adverse effects of living modified organisms in the conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity, from where the objective Article 1 of the Cartagena Protocol derives from. So it is mentioned in the current discussion on indicators that there is no methodology to address any potential target and indicator on LMOs, but that's subject to discussion. It depends on the approach that is going to have the target 17. But here it will be very important to recall elements that are in both the CBD and in the Cartagena Protocol. One is that the focus on preventing, here comes the precautionary approach, preventing adverse effects of LMOs on biodiversity. This is one. Once again, the aspect of the precautionary approach. And third, the relation to human health. So drafting something that has those elements is going to be challenging, but these three elements are consistent with the text of the CBD. So I would like to leave it there. This is just to start the discussion and to see clearly that the aspects that the Cartagena Protocol address are very relevant for a comprehensive approach towards biodiversity. Is very relevant if we are in this discussion that we have in relation to a human rights-based approach towards biodiversity, and certainly is very relevant to the welfare and livelihoods of women. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Georgina, for diving us into this super complex topic, and since it's interrelated with many others and many other negotiations and past decisions, it's a tough one. So at least if anyone has any question, comment, feel free to type it down and we will address it at the end of the session. We already have one, but I don't want to take more time, so we can ensure these moments for interaction with the audience. So we are going to go now with you, Ruth, if that's okay. We are moving on into the Nagoya Protocol now. Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you, and welcome to everyone who has joined the webinar. I'm going to focus on the Nagoya Protocol and share my experiences, how we have tried to implement this protocol in Antigua and Barbuda. Just a little background to the Nagoya Protocol. It was adopted 29th October 2010 in Nagoya, Japan. And it is very important because it creates legal certainty and transparency for both the providers and the users of genetic resources through more predictable conditions for access to genetic resources and ensuring benefit sharing when the genetic resources leave the country that is providing the genetic resources. By helping to ensure benefit sharing, the Nagoya Protocol creates incentives to conserve and sustainably use the genetic resources, and therefore enhances the contribution of biodiversity to people-centered development and human well-being. The Nagoya Protocol applies to genetic resources that are covered by the CBD Convention and the benefits arising from their utilization and the associated traditional knowledge. The Nagoya Protocol has access to obligations. It has access obligations. This is needed for legal certainty, clarity, transparency with fair and non-arbitrary rules and procedures for prior and informed consent and mutually agreed terms. There's issuance of a permit with conditions to promote and encourage research contributing to biodiversity conservation and sustainable use. As Georgina said, this protocol also pays due regard to cases of present and imminent emergencies that that threaten human, animal, or plant health, and considers the importance of genetic resources for food and agriculture for food security. There are also benefit sharing obligations. The utilization includes research and development on the genetic or biochemical composition of the genetic resources, such as subsequent applications and commercialization. Sharing is subject to mutually agreed terms. The benefits may be monetary or non-monetary, such as royalties and the sharing of research results. There are also compliance obligations in accordance with the PIC and the MAT. There can be alternate dispute mechanisms, access to justice, recourse under the legal systems, because disputes do arise from mutually agreed terms, and also with the monitoring of the utilization of the genetic resources after they leave a country, including by designing effective checkpoints at any stage of the value chain, whether it's research, development, innovation, pre-commercialization, or commercial. The Nagoya Protocol has provisions on access, benefit sharing, and compliance for traditional knowledge. This is very important for IPLCs. Their knowledge must be protected, and so there are provisions to ensure that the local knowledge is not abused. It also addresses genetic resources where IPLCs have already established right to grant access to them. The contracting parties must ensure that communities' prior and informed consent and fair and equitable sharing, always keeping in mind community laws and procedures, as well as customary use and exchange. The Nagoya Protocol ties in with other international obligations. One is like Antigua, which is a party to the Nagoya Protocol, have a set of additional obligations towards IPLC regarding their rights over associated traditional knowledge, and in some circumstances, over their genetic resources held in PIC or approval and involvement that the MAT has established. In implementing their obligations on the Nagoya Protocol, governments, parties are further required, in accordance with domestic law, to take into consideration IPLC's customary laws, community protocols, and procedures in respect to the associated traditional knowledge, and as far as possible, not to restrict the customary use and exchange of genetic resources and associated traditional knowledge within and amongst low IPLCs. Antigua has an indicative list of monetary and non-monetary benefits, which include the exchange of information, access to and transfer of technology, capacity building, research, training opportunities. It also includes the sharing of monetary and other benefits that arise from commercialization. In our country, applications or requests are sent to the competent authority for consideration. In terms of relationships with other international instruments and agreements, the Nagoya Protocol provides that the protocol be implemented in a mutually supportive manner with other international instruments relevant to the protocol. Antigua has also signed on to the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture. And this has a specific nature that must be considered, and the plant treaty addresses this. We had ABS legislation passed within our Environmental Protection and Management Act in 2015. And in 2016, 2016, the instrument of ratification was deposited at the United Nations. Even before the Escazú Agreement was ratified in 2020, our ABS agreements included PIC and MAT for bioprospectors. The processes included the inputs, observations, and knowledge of many local community groups headed by women who shared through inclusive and participatory processes on the Nagoya Protocol, enabling them to officially function as unofficial ABS checkpoints. This is very important because we had a lot of bioprospectors coming to the island, and they would go to the communities and they would try to pick the brains of the women to find out what the genetic resources were being used for. We have a lot of plants, a lot of them are used for medicinal purposes. And so these investors would go to the communities, talk to the people, and they got a lot of information. And in those days, nothing came back to the people. They took the knowledge, they made products, they made cosmetics, but because we didn't have this protocol in place, no benefits really arise to the people. Okay, let me go to the next slide. Time is going. I want to share of an initiative that's being done by a women's group in Antigua, the Antigua and Barbuda Horticultural Society. They have a community conservation area, and within that area, they are saving local seeds. Why is this important? You must have food security, as Georgina also said, when you bring in products that are genetically modified, they're not always the best for the people. They cause sometimes harm and health impacts. But by saving our local seeds, these seeds have adapted to our local soil, our temperature conditions, and we suffer from drought. And so the seeds have also adapted to these conditions. And there are promotional outreach done with farmers, backyards, gardens, who use the local seeds, asking them to bring them to this group, which has the seed bank set up. In addition, this particular group is involved in school programs. Children are invited to learn about seeds, and they're given opportunities to take these seeds home to plant them. So we have classes, we have courses, we have lectures. All these are part of the outreach of activities. And there were also plans afoot for wide school tree planting programs. So while agriculture is included in the GBF as a driver of biodiversity loss, women can provide solutions through various agroecological practices. And in Antigua, we do a lot of composting with organic waste. We have to add these to the soil because our soil is very, very dry. And by using the organic waste, which is an agroecological practice, we can improve the water holding content of the soils. Practices like this that are done by local groups need to be amplified at the national level. So with the Escazú Agreement coming into force and with my country ratifying, even though it's 29 years late, we are ensuring that local voices with local solutions, with local technologies that have worked, that have proven themselves over the years, can be integrated into national policy processes and decision-making processes. There are some challenges going forward because the number of agreements dealing with plants and plant genetic resources have created a range of differing and sometimes competing interests related to plants, genetic resources, and people, including the conservation of biodiversity, farmers' rights and practices, practice food security and food sovereignty. As modern crops become increasingly more homogeneous, breeders are finding it hard and difficult to return to the earlier varieties and crop wild relatives for the genetic variations necessary for the development of improved varieties. Some of these genetic resources are available through the multilateral system of access and benefiting sharing of the International Plant Treaty on Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture, but a number of them are available on farmers' field, and several plants significant to food supplies globally are not included in the annex, such as sugarcane, soybean, and nuts. Several countries that are important centers of origin are not members of the plant treaties, but are members of the Nagoya Protocol and protection of new varieties of plants, which is another convention, which would include China and Mexico. This means access to plant genetic resources for food and agriculture from these countries is a priori subject to Nagoya Protocol ABS requirement. There's no intent conflict between these three treaties at the international level, as they establish distinct but related legal regimes that cover different subjects. Parties that are ratified to these three treaties are bound by the general rules of international law that every treaty in force is binding upon the parties to it and must be performed by them in good faith. Lawmaking and the interpretation of laws at the domestic and international level really requires coordination among the relevant actors and interests. The evolving technologies, Georgina spoke to this again, have become a subject of intense discussion under the subject of DSI. The relevant resolution from COP14 of the CBD has noted that the term DSI may not be the most appropriate term to refer to the various types of information on genetic resources, and that it be placed as a placeholder until an alternative term is agreed. There remains a wide divide between parties on whether DSI should be considered within the scope of the CBD and the Nagoya Protocol. And this question is unlikely to be resolved before parties agree on terminology so that the scope of coverage is clear. One particularly contentious issue pertains to benefit sharing resulting from the utilization of DSI, but parties have committed to working on resolving the divergence of options through a science-based policy process on DSI. Thank you for the time.
Thank you so much, Ruth, for this explanation. And we will jump directly into Olga. Olga's participation, please. Olga, would you like to share your screen? We can hear you.
Opportunity, okay.
Yeah, you can start.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. Let me open the presentation from this side so that I can start sharing.
And meanwhile, for everyone, if you have any question, comment, please. For Ruth, we already have a couple for Georgina, but if you have any questions for Ruth or for Olga, please type them down in the chat and we will address them.
Okay, I will start to share my screen from this side.
Yes.
I hope we can all see the screen now.
Yeah, maybe you can make it in,
okay, let me make it a bit larger. That's fine. Is it okay now?
Yeah, maybe you can make it as
yes.
Yeah.
for the opportunity to share my experiences with regards to Article 21 and 22 of the Nagoya Protocol, not only sharing experiences, but also trying to interpret these two articles from a gender perspective and how it actually helps to make sure that issues of gender equity and equality are achieved. Let me start by just doing a recap from what Georgina and Ruth have already reiterated, issues to do with voices for indigenous communities, issues to do with coming up with solutions, issues to do with resolution of disputes, exchange of knowledge, and all those other activities which are involved in as far as achieving goals of the UNCBD are concerned. They are all hinged on the need for having proper capacity building and awareness raising. These communities should be aware, and that awareness and capacity building should embrace the gender component, taking a human rights-based approach. So with this in mind, I think Ruth and Georgina have already set the pace or the tone for my presentation. And I'm going to go into my presentation, which will look at the 4 key issues, tools for implementation. Then I'm going to look at certain sections of the Article 21 of the Nagoya Protocol, and I will extract some key points which relate to gender perspectives and what this means in as far as achieving the goals in as far as sustainable use of biodiversity is concerned. Then I'll move on to Article 22 of the Nagoya Protocol, look at the sub-articles which also pertain to gender. Then I'll wrap it up with a take-home message. So if you look at tools and mechanisms, of course, the Nagoya Protocol, like what Ruth has already said, it has got a number of articles which are included. But when we focus on Article 21 and 22, basically, these two are focusing on capacity building and awareness. Article 21, focusing on awareness raising for communities to know what is available and what they are entailed to do in as far as participation, meaningful participation is concerned. Then there is need for them to be aware in terms of their responsibilities and how they can participate with regards to biodiversity conservation issues. And this requires that they have access to information and they're also aware, they are knowledgeable about what type of skills they need and what is it that they should do. And this includes both men and women and all the vulnerable groups in our communities, especially those indigenous communities whose life is hinged upon natural resources, the biodiversity resources which they depend on. So in as far as capacity building is concerned, you realize that Article 22 focuses on that, and I am going to focus on the sub-articles which look at that. So the key questions which we should reflect on are why, how, why capacity building, and how can this be done, where, by who, when, and what should be addressed. Then we can also say, even when we look at awareness about what, where, how, when, and also by who. So there are quite a number of issues which we need to reflect on in as far as these two articles are concerned. So perhaps one key question which we can also think about, if we look at our indigenous communities, a larger proportion of women from birth, they are responsible for childbearing. We have a gender roles where women play a key role, not only in terms of imparting language. Remember when I started talking, the first words which I actually knew and how I used to communicate, even on biodiversity matters, you acquire that from women. Mothers play a key role. starting from household level. So they have knowledge about the environment, knowledge about resources which are useful in the home. And this is actually critical in terms of promoting livelihoods. So at the end of the day, even when in our African traditional system, like here in Zimbabwe, even when most men marry, they end up speaking the women language, which means language acquisition is also important. And language, when you look at the medium of communication media, various platforms, they take advantage of language. So language is also critical. So in trying to promote awareness raising and also capacity building towards achieving the goals of the Nagoya Protocol, there is a need to make sure that we do this from taking into consideration balancing issues to do with gender equity and equality. And how can this be achieved? If you look at Article 21, Article 21 has got 10 measures which have been outlined in as far as awareness raising is concerned. So we have measures which pertain to promotion of the protocol itself. And this can be through organization of meetings by indigenous and local communities and other relevant stakeholders. So bringing together. So in Africa, we usually say when people come together and sharing, that's important and that's a beginning. So you always find that gatherings are key and important in terms of information sharing and information dissemination. And this organization of meetings should take into consideration women's participation. Do we have a quota of women who participate on those matters, or women are excluded? So, and usually when we have such meetings, sometimes women are busy with other roles, but yet they have a closer relationship with their biodiversity resources. So how can this be done? So you also need to make sure that women are incorporated. They are also given a platform to air their voices so that when solutions are developed, they are part and parcel of the solutions. Establishment of a desk for indigenous and local communities and relevant stakeholders. So these help desks, it could be information booth. These information desks are also key. It is also important that they are established in such a manner that even the language which is used, like I've already alluded to, language is key in terms of information dissemination. And when you look at information dissemination through the National Clearinghouse, it is important that indigenous people are also aware of how this is done. So there is a need to be aware of the various processes so that we have guarantee that there's protection of knowledge, which is supposed to select appropriate information, which is supposed to be housed. And also looking at some of the measures in terms of awareness raising, consultation is very, very important. So we have promotion of those codes, guidelines, and best practices and standards, which are key in making sure that local communities, indigenous communities are also recognized in as far as what they are supposed to do in terms of promoting access and benefit sharing. So we are looking at equitable utilization of these resources. Are they aware in terms of what they actually admit to, what they also consent to do? So appropriate guidelines, even at national level, at local level, need to be observed. Not only at local level, but even promoting domestic, regional, and international experiences. So in terms of awareness raising, this can also be done through education and training, and through involving all indigenous and local communities and relevant stakeholders. Eventually, awareness raising can be achieved and various platforms can be utilized, and these platforms should be gender friendly. Then moving on to Article 22. Article 22 has got about 6 sub-articles, and of these sub-articles, I have extracted components which relate to the gender dimension in as far as achieving the goals for access and benefit sharing are concerned. So in terms of capacity building, I will give an example here. As a university, we are also part and parcel of the capacity building process, whereby we make sure that through existing global, regional, and national institutions and organizations, we are also able to partner and collaborate towards ensuring that capacity building is achieved in as far as biodiversity conservation and sustainable use is concerned. So you realize that as universities, we also uphold the principles of gender equity and equality, because we also consider these issues in terms of allocation of resources and who should be capacitated in as far as conservation of biodiversity is concerned. So various parties, so you realize that according to this sub-article 22.1, involvement of indigenous local communities, all stakeholders, including development partners, the private sector, is key in as far as ensuring that we achieve national targets and the national agenda in as far as conservation of biodiversity resources is concerned. So you realize that when you look at our national policy platforms, they also allow for that. So apart from capacity building, sub-article 22.2 talks about the need to avail financial resources in accordance with relevant provisions of the convention. So for capacity building to occur and development, there is need to avail the financial resources. And this could be through access to various grants. And these grants also consider a quota for women based on merit, of course. So when you have all those resources, those economies which are in transition can also reach out for, it could be partner with development partners so that they can access financial resources, but mobilization of resources, even at a local level, is also key. I can give an example of a project which I participated in, where I got financial, a grant was availed, and during this process, I had an opportunity to work with women through capacity building on matters pertaining biodiversity resources, especially riparian-based goods and services in the face of this changing climate. So this is an example of where parties can come in and make sure that these resources, knowledge about availability of those financial resources should also be known, not only to women who are advantaged, but also women who are part of the vulnerable groups. They should have access to those resources. Then sub-article 3 of the same article talks about the support and prioritizing indigenous and local communities, emphasizing on capacity needs and priorities of women. So the idea is engaging women. When you prioritize the needs of women, it means there is a need for co-development, co-generation of ideas, so that you can co-generate solutions together for and by the women in mind. So it's not like you go to a community with a ready-made package so that you actually tell them what to do. They've been living with the resources for time immemorial, and they know what it means. So even if you look at our developing countries, we have the policies in place from our national constitution, which allows for that need to consider gender. So because gender is a cross-cutting issue, you realize that when you look at gender responsive activities, these should make sure that we promote all vulnerable groups, whether they are young people, whether they are women, they are men, taking into consideration that they have various roles and needs in society. Then sub-article 4 talks about implementation of the protocol through capacity building and development. So you realize that these extracts from the sub-articles from Article 21 and 22, they are all interlinked somehow. But the whole idea eventually is to achieve capacity building. So for negotiations to occur on mutually agreed terms, there is a need for capacity building, knowledge. What are we negotiating about, for example? How are we negotiating? What is it that we are going to show so that you make sure that everything is done in a manner which is transparent? Negotiations, signing of contracts. We have the business component to benefits which arise from the utilization of biodiversity resources. All this entails knowledge building, skills building. Ruth earlier on talked about technical know-how, talked about digital solutions, but these solutions, are they known to indigenous peoples? Do they have the skills which complement their knowledge so that they are able to participate meaningfully, knowing what exactly they are entering into in as far as agreements and contracts signing is concerned? So enforcing the domestic legislation, like I've said already, if you look at Zimbabwe, we have Section 19 of the Zimbabwe Constitution. It talks of gender issues, the gender balance. So gender is also embedded in our national policies, national constitution, and this cascades down to the national biodiversity policies, the national biodiversity strategy and all the action plans. They also include a gender dimension. Then sub-article 5.j, if you look at sub-article 5, it has got many other measures, but I extracted Article 5J, which talks about the need to enhance the capacity of women within these communities to access genetic resources and traditional knowledge. So traditional knowledge is key. Indigenous knowledge systems, communities have got knowledge which they have with regards to utilization of resources. So such knowledge can only be shared under certain conditions which allow the communities eventually to benefit, and so that there's no exploitation of these communities who are the holders of the knowledge. Then the last sub-article is sub-article number 6, where we talk of information capacity building and development at all levels, starting at national level up to international level. So it also encompasses all the other sub-articles from Article 1.5. So at the end of the day, the idea is to make sure there's need to promote synergies, coordination, and capacity building for access and benefit sharing, but bearing in mind that all this should be done acknowledging issues to do with gender equity and equality. Do men and women have equal access to platforms where these negotiations are done? When it comes to skills acquisition, are women also given a chance? When it comes to women, are they at the forefront of skills building? In what way are they contributing towards skills building? So this is very, very important. So to wrap this off, I have a take-home message to say, women must play a lead role in as far as awareness raising and capacity building is concerned. Indigenous people should be involved. There's need to harness and embrace their knowledge so that it can be incorporated in as far as proper and adequate access and benefit sharing mechanisms are concerned. And there's also need to integrate the spatial and sectoral dimension in as far as decision making, and also when you look at action to do with proper sustainable use and management of biodiversity resources is concerned. And training and capacity building should consider that gender element. And a human rights-based approach is critical to achieve gender equality and equity in as far as conservation is concerned. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Olga, for your presentation. I would just like to acknowledge all of our speakers that kindly shared with us their wisdom and their experience, because as you have seen, these are really complicated topics, too technical, and they have make a huge exercise of sharing with all of us in a more simple and more understandable language. So I just want to mention them again. We had at the beginning Dr. Georgina Catacora-Vargas from the Bolivian Catholic University of San Pablo. We also had a Ruth Spencer, chair for MEPA Trust. And lastly, we have Olga Laiza from Zimbabwe University. Thank you so much for the three of you. And please, if you have any question, any comment, type them down in the chat. We are reaching just the end of the session, but if we allow a couple of more minutes, we will address them. So far, Georgina already answered them in the chat, and we have a couple of comments, both for Olga and from Ruth, about highlighting important key points. On our side, we, as also Tina has shared in the chat, we want to bring it to attention to everyone that these topics are going to be also discussed in December in Montreal, because as everyone knows, apart from the COP, we are going to have the meeting of the parties for these two protocols. And please feel engaged more with them. And I'm sharing in the chat the link to register to the Women's Caucus in case you want to participate in all of our sessions. But also, please reach out to the experts that are here, Georgina, Olga, and Ruth, if you have any question. Or maybe also our speakers could share your, you can share your contact details in case people want to contact you and if they have any particular question. And well, on our side, that's everything, because we are just reaching the promised hour, and we encourage everyone to participate in the upcoming sessions. This is the last of this series, but we will have more in the next months, and we will share also some updates about the COP and what is going to be discussed there. Keep following us in the social media through Women for Biodiversity, and thanks for our members to be here, and those that are not part of the Women Caucus, please join us. And yeah, now addressing the question shared by Bintu, if you're already a member from the Women Caucus, you will receive an invitation to join the preparatory meeting that we're going to have on December 6th, and also the rest of the activities. And in case you are not haven't registered into the Women Caucus, I'm sharing in the chat the form to do so. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Just if anyone, please can open your camera. We would like to take a group picture of this session. And if you have any other suggestion about any topic, any thing that you would like to learn about, some issue that you would like to discuss more, also feel free to reach out to us and suggest them, and we will take them into account for the next series of webinars. Thank you, everyone. And yeah, Sharon, let me know whenever you're ready to take the pictures. Yeah, everyone say hi, say cheese, say, you know, all of your languages. Yeah, I think we are ready. We are done. Thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy your day, enjoy your evening. And it has been a really pleasure to have this series and be accompanied by all of you. Thank you, and see you in the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.